Alright guys, so wanted fugitive war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu recently sat down on the Full Send podcast with the Nelk Boys while he was here in Washington, D.C. Now, I'm not really familiar with these guys. I guess they came up as sort of prank YouTubers. Now they have this podcast. They're trying to branch more into politics. And so they decided to sit down and to have a friendly conversation with a man who is currently perpetrating one of the worst atrocities in modern history. Now, as you can tell from the comments down below the video that they posted here, their audience is not too happy, to say the least, with how all of this went down. So you have people saying unsubscribed, people saying I miss when YouTube used to show dislikes, you didn't question him once, this is crazy, zero pushback, you literally just let a war criminal talk freely for an hour to millions of fans. So people are not happy. I want to go through a couple of different clips that were floating around from this. We're going to talk about it. We're going to watch their reaction to all of the backlash to this. We're going to see Hasan and Adam Friedland push back and confront them over all of this. And then we're going to get to some updates on the latest of the genocide that this man, Benjamin Netanyahu, is currently carrying out. Now, let's go ahead and jump into this first clip of Benjamin Netanyahu being asked, why do people around the world hate you? Now, keep in mind, the first thing that they said when this entire segment started here, this entire interview, was, we are not qualified to do this. Right. So maybe you would have a follow-up question internally for yourself as to like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, but they admitted they're not qualified to do it. They did it anyway. And here is the result.
I think you definitely have a tough job, but why do you think you're like so hated worldwide?
Well, a lot of propaganda. The Chancellor of Germany said Israel did the work for all of us, the new Chancellor of Germany, okay? Because those Iranian missiles were geared at Europe too, and ultimately at America. The question you have to ask is not why do they hate me or President Trump, is why don't they see reality? Why don't they see what's good for them? And the answer is most of them do if you tell them the facts. But how do you tell them the facts over TikTok?
I don't think it's the Iran thing. The main thing I just see is if I don't think people like if civilians are getting injured or killed.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when you are live streaming a genocide where people can go on Twitter, they can go on any social media site and see an endless stream of children with limbs blown off on a daily basis, not really going to encourage people to appreciate your country or your government, right? Now, incredibly ironic that coming from a guy like Benjamin Netanyahu, right, the top dog of the Israeli state, criticizing propaganda, right? As if that's the reason why, especially young Americans and young people from across the world, including in Europe, have turned against Israel. As if he is not a nonstop lying propaganda machine. That is how the Israeli government operates, whether it's bombing a hospital and then blaming it on Hamas, or saying we didn't bomb a hospital, we would never bomb a hospital, and then continuing to blow up the entirety of the Gaza medical system, whether it's, you know, in targeting civilians at aid sites and then saying, no, that wasn't us, we would never do that, that was Hamas, and then oops, okay, maybe we did do that, but it was an accident, or they were threatening us. Every single thing that comes out of Benjamin Netanyahu's mouth, every single thing that comes out from the Israeli military is propaganda. It is lies, nonstop, all the fucking time. So incredible coming from him on that. He also talks about Iran and says the Iranian military had their missiles set on Europe and set on the United States, and that Israel did us this grand favor by nearly dragging us into a full-blown regime change operation. Wouldn't be the first time in the Middle East, and as if that was a good thing. Number one, to get the facts right, as Bibi was commenting there, Iran wasn't pushing for a nuclear weapon. There was no evidence whatsoever that that was the case. You were in the middle of negotiations on a longer-term deal, right? Keep in mind the previous deal was the one that Trump ripped to shreds that Iran was following in accordance with, and Israel wanted to push forward with a regime change operation. So you engaged in an illegal offensive war of aggression against a country that didn't attack you, that wasn't going to attack you, certainly wasn't going to attack Europe or the United States, and then you turn around and you spin it in this kind of a way. I mean, it's all so wildly dishonest. Now, again, you see a little bit of pushback there from the Nelk Boys saying, well, people just don't like when civilians are being killed, but they're just not equipped, right? Even they would admit this. They're not equipped to get into the nuanced conversation with a guy like Benjamin Netanyahu. So they're sort of just like rolling over on a lot of the basic facts that he's lying about in regards to this entire situation. So we continue. We also had Benjamin Netanyahu weighing in on Zoran Mamdani winning the New York City mayoral race. Now, ask yourself, why Benjamin Netanyahu would feel the need to have an opinion on a New York City primary race for the Democratic Party, or who the New York City mayor even is in the first place, and why potentially he doesn't like a guy like Mamdani. Let's go ahead and watch this clip here.
Even in New York City, right? What's Zoran?
Yeah.
He's an anti-Semitic guy.
Yeah.
The highest, I think the highest population of Jews in New York City. How's that even possible?
Well, it's possible because a lot of people have been taken in by this nonsense. I mean, what, you want to defund the police? You want to have people go into stores and, rob them and be free? You think that really creates a good society? You want to crush all enterprise? You want to tax people to death? I mean, that's a one-term effort, but, sometimes you have to get mugged by reality.
Okay, so, I mean, again, this is about Israel, right? Let's keep that in mind. He doesn't actually have an issue with Zoran wanting to raise taxes on the wealthy by 2%, or the fact that he wants, a couple of government-backed grocery stores in each of the 5 boroughs where there's not enough access to groceries, or whatever the case may be. He doesn't actually have an issue with those kinds of policies, right? This is about the fact that Zoran Mamdani is principally critical of Israel, and that he did not back down even when he was pressed over and over and over on this issue during the campaign. Remember when he was doing the debate with Cuomo and the rest of those guys on the stage, and they asked them, what would be the first country that you go and visit? And it went Israel, Israel, Ukraine, and Israel. Israel gets to Zoran, and he says, I'm going to stay here in New York and look after my constituents. And then the hosts step in and they say, why wouldn't you go to Israel, right? Do you affirm the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state? I mean, the entire mania surrounding Zoran and the Israel question was completely absurd. And clearly, it didn't work. The attacks on him as being anti-Semitic, which he's not, the focusing on phrases like globalize the intifada that he never even said, all of this didn't work, right? So you made an attempt. You tried to frame him as anti-Semitic, even as this, co-host of this interview here frames him as, with no evidence whatsoever. None of that worked. And it didn't work to the extent that even a majority, and this is something Andrew Cuomo just admitted in leaked audio a couple of days ago, even a majority of Jewish New Yorkers, especially young Jewish New Yorkers, backed Zoran Mamdani. So, he's not anti-Semitic, clearly, but he's a critic of Israel. And to a guy like Benjamin Netanyahu, those are the same thing. Those are the same thing, which in and of itself, and I've made this case before, to me is incredibly anti-Semitic because, and is going to lead to an increase in anti-Semitism, because what you're saying is that Jewish people all around the world are tied to and are in some sense responsible for the actions of the government of Israel. And when you're committing a genocide, that's not going to reflect very well on people, right? So, I mean, it's a completely ridiculous smear job that both the podcast guys here, as well as Benjamin Netanyahu, are getting in on. And, clearly he doesn't want somebody like Zoran to be leading the largest city in the country. Now, we move on. Now we get to some of the worst of this interview. Benjamin Netanyahu on allegations of starving people in Gaza. He was asked about this, and I'll let you guys guess whether or not he admitted to an intentional campaign of starvation.
Why do they say Israel's like starving the people of Gaza?
Well, because we're trying to get the food in, and we let food trucks in, and guess what happens when we let them in? Hamas steals the food, takes the good chunk for itself. Then they jack up the prices, and then they sell the food to its population, to its hungry population, if they give them at all. And then use the money that they take from their own people to recruit more killers into their terror machine.
Okay, so again, a lie here. We've heard from the World Food Program. We've heard from Cindy McCain, the wife of the now deceased John McCain, who was an uber Zionist through and through, major supporter of Israel. And Cindy McCain and the World Food Program have said on multiple different occasions that there is no evidence that Hamas, in a widespread, systemic way, is looting aid and then reselling it and making these massive profits from it, and et cetera, et cetera. There's just not evidence of that. Right? The reality is that Israel, since the beginning of this, has been restricting aid from getting into Gaza. Now, a couple of months ago, I believe back in May or March, they completely cut off the aid from getting in. They said no more food is going to be allowed into Gaza. And we are seeing catastrophic consequences to that I'll show you guys here in a second, where people at this point are dropping dead in the streets, dying from starvation. Now, again, he's asked about this. He says, no, it's actually Hamas is stealing the aid and we're not blocking it, and it's not our fault that people are starving to death. And the pushback to that is nothing exactly. The pushback is non-existent to this kind of thing. Now, again, It's fine to do this kind of an interview. If I had the opportunity to interview a guy like Benjamin Netanyahu, I would. But that's because I know that I'm somewhat equipped to be able to push back when he brazenly lies like this in my face. They're not equipped to do that. And so they ask somewhat of a prodding question, somewhat of an interesting question that you could follow up on, but there's no follow-up because they don't know the basic facts of what's going on. And so the end result of this kind of an interview is you're just allowing him to launder his reputation. You are allowing him to whitewash a genocide, to whitewash a modern day Holocaust to your audience. And so we continue on that same front. I mean, this is kind of just disgusting. They got into a conversation about their Burger King orders, right? I mean, keep in mind, this is the same guy who is starving 2 million people to death right now. And they're talking about their favorite Burger King orders.
What's your go-to at McDonald's?
No, I'll tell you, Burger King. We did the double,
Whopper?
The
I haven't ripped Burger King in a long
it's
time.
not.
Burger
call
King
it
kind of
something.
sucks.
Yeah.
No,
The,
you're wrong.
the BK Lounge can hit.
I disagree completely.
You like
I mean,
Burger King over McDonald's?
That's your worst take, I think.
Absolutely.
That's a crazy take.
no,
That's the biggest pushback that I've seen from any of these clips was on Burger King over McDonald's. Again, I mean, the idea that you're asking a wanted fugitive war criminal who is engaging in an intentional mass starvation campaign, who is using food as a weapon of war, and you're asking him about his Burger King orders. I mean, guys, like, at some point, you have to recognize how fucked up this is. Now, we continue. This is the post-game analysis from these two guys as they're sitting here like chugging wine, I guess, in this clip. And they kind of just straight up say, yeah, that was kind of like interviewing the modern day Hitler. Let's go ahead and watch this.
It's a good point. Someone said having Netanyahu on is like having modern day Hitler.
No, I saw that.
Which is, honestly, guys, I'll be honest. I'm here to... It's a good point. We're here to fucking learn, to be honest, guys.
So, calls him the modern day Hitler, effectively, says that we basically just interviewed the modern day Hitler, and then he says, we're just trying to learn. Dude, the learning part of this kind of a thing usually comes before you interview the guy who is perpetrating the modern Holocaust, right? You don't learn from the modern day Hitler in real time. That's not how learning works, right? You learn the basic facts of what's going on. You look at credible sources. You look at what people are saying on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. And then maybe you could go into that kind of an interview and be more informed and ask more critical questions and push back on some of the lies that he's spreading. You don't do that after the fact, right? So in your post-game analysis, you're like, yeah, we kind of just interviewed Hitler and let him whitewash a current Holocaust that he's engaging in. Oops, you live and you learn, I guess, is the message that they're going with here. Now, we continue. Here we have Hasan, Piker, and Adam Friedland going after them on this on the interview. So let's go ahead and watch this clip. I'll put it at 1.25 times speed.
It's sometimes I'm doing a podcast. It's just a podcast, but you don't realize that there's like a gravity there. There are powerful people wanting access to your fucking platform that have an agenda. It's just like when I was asking about like Zuckerberg, right? His stock plummets when he's like doing the censorship around COVID, and then everyone's like, "You're anti-free speech Democrat," and then he puts a chain against muscles, and then his stock goes back up. But like it's this, everyone that says you're an anti-free speech Democrat is like, "No, you're sick because you do bow and arrow." But he's like he's going on podcasts now because it's his stock price. It's an advantage for them. And
they're
it's like,
using you
guys,
guys.
like,
They're using you guys to look good.
Yes, obviously they're being used, right? He doesn't go on your platform because he wants to have an interesting or informative conversation. It's to get access to your audience, right? These are major YouTubers here, right? I think on their main channel, they have millions and millions and millions of subscribers, probably disproportionately young people. But Benjamin Netanyahu, during the interview, openly said to their faces, that's why I'm doing the interview, to try to reach a younger audience. And so that's the results of this, right? I mean, as Adam was pointing out there, like, this isn't a normal situation, right? And Hasan goes on to say this in another clip where he says Netanyahu's not promoting a book, right? He's promoting a genocide. It's like, this is not like you're interviewing some controversial figure in entertainment or in sports or in some other realm, or even, a more baseline politician. Like, it's not like you're interviewing Pete Buttigieg and let's try to figure out who he is as a person, right? That's not what this is. You are interviewing one of the most notorious war criminals, a guy who probably during the course of you recording that podcast was responsible for killing dozens of people. This is not a normal situation where it's just, let's humanize this guy and try to have a conversation about, his views on things and what his favorite thing to order from Burger King is. It's not that kind of a situation, right? And again, it's not even about like platforming or not platforming, right? We're talking about Benjamin Netanyahu. He has whatever platform that he wants. It's not about that. It's just like basic preparedness, right? And this is kind of what bothers me the most about this kind of a space in the sort of like brosphere podcast kind of thing, is that they simultaneously want to be in the political discussion, but then they also don't want to frame themselves as being in the political realm, right? They want to do journalism, which is what that interview kind of was in a sense, but then they don't want to be held to any sort of standards of journalism. It's like, pick one, right? If you're going to interview powerful politicians, in some circumstances, it can be a good idea to try to get to their human side and be more relaxed and conversational with them. But this is not one of those. This is not one of those situations, right? You have some level of baseline responsibility when you are interviewing Benjamin fucking Netanyahu, and they don't feel any sort of obligation to learn, to actually understand what you're doing before that kind of a situation takes place. And that's what's frustrating to me. It's like, you don't have to be journalists. You don't have to abide by rigorous standards of whatever, CNN or the New York Times or whatever. If that's what you want to be, then that's fine. Be that. But then don't do journalism, right? Don't try to interview a notorious war criminal as if he's, just a regular Joe. So I don't know. I mean, you guys tell me, like, at the end of the day, I don't think that it worked clearly in terms of laundering Netanyahu's reputation, as you could see from the comments under the video itself. I wonder what the like to dislike ratio was in that. So I don't think it worked in that sense to any sort of broad extent. And if anything, I think the biggest result from this is that they fucked themselves. Like, a huge portion of your audience is turning against you guys now because of how you just handled this. And so I don't know where they sort of go from here. Good luck to them, I guess. But definitely, I would hope at least is like a reflecting point to just think about it, maybe have some sort of integrity going in to that kind of a thing. Now, in terms of the latest on the genocide itself, we are currently witnessing continued daily aid massacres at these pretend aid sites, which are really just killing fields, in the words of IDF soldiers themselves. Continued massacres on the daily happening at these aid sites and across the rest of Gaza as well. And we're also seeing an intensification of the starvation campaign and the catastrophic results that we're seeing at this point. So a couple of things here from military.com. UN Food Agency says Israeli tanks and snipers opened fire on a crowd seeking aid in Gaza. There are also reports that the Israeli military has been using naval fire, like shelling crowds of people who are gathering at these aid sites. And keep in mind that these aid sites are not actually intended to deliver adequate aid to the people of Gaza. They are, number one, a way for Israel to pretend as though we're not engaging in mass starvation. Look, we're providing them with food at these aid sites, right? So it's a deflection thing, number one. And number two, it is a part of the openly stated Israeli government plan, Trump-backed plan, to use these aid sites as essentially bait points to push the population further and further south, to eventually collect them into a mass concentration camp, and then to eventually expel them from Gaza, to fully ethnically cleanse them from the Gaza Strip and push them into surrounding countries. That's the purpose of these aid sites, right? Now we continue. We have here from Job Site News pointing out that the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Israeli soldiers opened fire on starving Palestinians carrying white flags. They say the Wall Street Journal shared a new investigation on Israeli troops repeatedly opening fire on aid-seeking Palestinians near U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites. One Israeli reservist told the Wall Street Journal that he witnessed soldiers shoot at Palestinians carrying white flags who veered off these approved aid paths. They say, quote, "We have an unwritten rule. If they get too close, you don't take that risk." He said troops are instructed to fire warning shots in the air or at people directly, and acknowledged mistakes happen. Mistakes like dozens of people being murdered on a daily basis, hundreds of people being wounded on a daily basis. They're firing live ammunition at people, and then saying they're warning shots. That's not what a warning shot is. That's not a mistake. That is a daily war crime that you are committing. Every single day we're seeing this. Now, we also have here from Euromed in terms of the specifics of one of these recent massacres. They say the Israeli army has committed one of its most heinous massacres against starving civilians waiting for humanitarian aid in northern Gaza. The army ordered the civilians to approach aid trucks with their hands raised and then opened fire on them without provocation. When the first groups arrived, Israeli tanks were already stationed in the area. Soldiers then used loudspeakers to command, quote, "Raise your hands and walk in front of the tanks. Those who want flour, come forward." Around 200 civilians complied with that order. As they neared the aid trucks, Israeli forces suddenly opened heavy fire directly at their heads, instantly killing dozens. Others were left crawling, wounded, and bleeding, and the massacre left 80 dead and over 520 injured, many of whom are in critical condition. And the estimates that I've seen is that over about the last 5 days, there have been over 550 Palestinians killed at these aid sites. That's over 100 per day over the last 5 days. We also had here this report from a doctor inside of Gaza, a British surgeon, Nick Maynard, who says, quote, "These children are being targeted almost as if it's a game. One day they're all shot in the head, the next day in the neck, and another day in the testicles. There is a clear and deliberate pattern to the injuries." Tell me once again, for any Israel supporters out there, any defenders of their actions in Gaza, how you could possibly square the idea that they are going after Hamas and civilians may unfortunately be in the way, how you square that with Israeli snipers shooting children in the head as a regular occurrence. Does that square in your head? Does that make sense as if this is some part of a self-defense war? I mean, it's so beyond disgusting at this point, but this is what we've allowed to become normalized. We also have here from Dropsite News in terms of the intensification of the starvation campaign. They say here from Sharif Abdel Qudus, Palestinians are collapsing in Gaza streets from Israeli-imposed starvation campaign, a frontline report on a people forced to face death from starvation or being shot in a perilous quest to obtain meager rations. This takes a lot, guys. I mean, keep in mind, we're not talking about like people who skipped a meal here and there. In order to get to the point where you are literally dropping dead in the streets, where you are having organ failure as a result of starvation, this is something that takes place over weeks, over months and months and months. And that's what we've seen since Israel completely shut off the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza, putting aside these bullshit Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites that are, again, just killing sites at this point. This is what we've seen over the last number of months. Everybody warned about this. They said there is an imminent famine that is coming. People are going to start dying in mass from starvation, and that's exactly what we have ended up seeing. We have here from the BBC saying that Gaza Hospital has said that 21 children have died from malnutrition in just the last 72 hours, as the UN is warning, as the UN warns last lifelines are collapsing. 21 children in just the last couple of days have died from malnutrition. And this is only going to escalate as we move forward. We also have here from Anas al-Sharif from Al Jazeera saying that 85% of Gaza's population have entered the 5th stage of malnutrition, the most critical and dangerous phase, which is often irreversible even if food becomes available in the future. And this is another aspect of this. Obviously, we keep track of the death toll, which is, a drastic undercount based on all of the information that we have at our disposal. The 50 to 60,000 number, I wouldn't be shocked if it's actually closer to, 200 to 400,000 that have actually died. But beyond that, I mean, how many children have lost their limbs? The estimates are that there are 10 children per day who have been losing their limbs inside of Gaza. So you have long-lasting consequences of child amputees. They've created the largest population of child amputees in the world. How many people have lost their parents, have lost their family members, have seen their family members die in front of them, have been through traumatic experiences, many of them children who will never recover from that. And then on top of that, you have this starvation campaign that not only has the mental torture of it all, but also has obviously long-lasting, if not, lifelong physical consequences that will never be repaired, regardless of whether or not there's a flood of aid tomorrow. I mean, this is a full-blown genocide. We are witnessing the end stage of this genocide that is all collapsing into a singularity at this point. And again, it's only going to get worse from here. Now, we also have here from the French outlet, the AFP, saying that its journalists themselves are in imminent risk of being starved to death by Israel. This has never happened since the agency was founded. Never has any of its journalists been starved to death. But that is where we are at this point. Now, it's not only the Palestinians who are still trapped in Gaza who are being starved to death. We also have this here from Dropsite News saying that Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, the head of the Kamal Adwan hospital in Gaza, has lost a third of his body weight while in Israeli detention. This is one of the doctors that Israel kidnapped and then proceeded to torture in their captivity. He's lost a third of his body weight since he was detained by Israel, surviving on just 2 spoonfuls of rice per day, according to his lawyer. She was recently granted access to see him in Ofer prison and reports, quote, repeatedly assaulted. Dr. Safia has reportedly been severely beaten at least 6 times. On June 24th, the day of Iran's strike on the Soroka hospital in Israel, prison guards raided his cell and beat him, leaving bruises on his head, neck, and back. His request for medical treatment was denied. They also point out inhumane conditions, saying that he's held underground without access to clean clothes, showers, or medical care. Scabies is rampant, according to his lawyer. They only get medical attention when they are on the verge of death. They also say one of over 100 detained medics. They've detained over 100 medics, saying Physicians for Human Rights Israel says that over 250 Palestinian medical workers have been detained since October. More than 100 remain jailed, vast majority without any charges. Dr. Abu Safia was last seen in his white coat walking through the rubble towards an Israeli tank. So this is what they're doing to a doctor in Israeli detention. Keep in mind, there are thousands and thousands of Palestinians who are facing this kind of detention, who are facing daily torture. Many of them, if not most of them, are held without any sort of charge, any sort of due process, any sort of trial, or anything like that. And they are being tortured in Israeli facilities. Now, we continue. We also had this here from Alex DeWall, who's one of the world's foremost experts on famine. He says, quote, there is no case since World War II of starvation that has been so minutely designed and controlled. And that's an important part of all of this, is that this is not an accidental part of war, right? This is not a consequence of a war that is developed naturally. This is an intentional, planned starvation campaign. That's what this is. Now we continue. We also had this here from Jeffrey Sachs. He says, Israel is in a nonstop war crime status, in genocidal status, without shame, without remorse, without truth. This is a murderous gang in government. They are zealots and they are not going to stop. And unfortunately, the one guy on planet Earth who actually has the power singularly to stop Israel right now is Donald Trump. The same Donald Trump who, took $100 million from Miriam Adelson to allow Israel to annex the West Bank. The same Donald Trump who has been fully committed to backing and arming Israel throughout his portion of the genocide that he has presided over after Joe Biden. The same Donald Trump who not only continues to send them weapons, but to defend them on the international stage, to attack anybody in the international realm who dares to go after Israel, including the U.S. just recently sanctioning Francesca Albanese, a UN special rapporteur, at the same time that we are removing sanctions on the former Al-Qaeda head, the now leader of Syria. I mean, it's a sick joke at this point, right? The extent of U.S. involvement in all of this is 1-to-1, right? This is as much the United States genocide as it is Israel's genocide. And obviously, Professor Jeffrey Sachs is right about that. A genocidal status country, a rogue genocidal apartheid state. Now, finishing off here, we also have from Dropsite pointing out that the Israeli finance minister Bezalel Smotrich just said today, he says, we must return to settling Gaza, and we now have a historic opportunity to do so. He says, we have strong support from the U.S. president to turn Gaza into a prosperous area under Israeli control, so just full annexation. There is a plan that would allow Gaza's residents to rebuild their lives, but in other countries willing to receive them. So this is the finance minister, right? In his ideal world, right, in his most humane vision for the future of Gaza, maybe not all of them will be massacred. They'll just be ethnically cleansed into surrounding countries. That's like best case scenario for Palestinians that he's offering, that he's envisioning. The other scenario is the Trump-backed plan to effectively concentrate them into a massive concentration camp and then to give them the offer. Do you want to stay here and starve and die, or do you want to leave? And that's the ethnic cleansing plan, the Trump plan that they are openly and proudly admitting to. So, I mean, the craziest part about all of this is that this is all out in the open, guys. Like, you don't have to guess. You don't have to try to reason or logic your way into figuring out what exactly Israel's motives are, what their goals are. They just say it. They just say it, right? Which, again, tying it back to the Nelk Boys situation, it's like, this is not difficult stuff to figure out, right? Go and look at what Israeli officials are saying. Go look at their actions on the ground in Gaza. It's not a hard puzzle to solve when they openly say things like this. We're going to resettle Gaza. We're going to annex Gaza. We're going to push the population out. I mean, Trump literally used the word clean out Gaza when referring to his plan of full ethnic cleansing. It's not a difficult thing to figure out what's going on here. We also had, backing up that same thing, a meeting in the Israeli Knesset saying meeting of the lobby for the renewal of Jewish settlement in the Gaza Strip, the Gaza Riviera, from vision to reality. And as pointed out again here by Nathan Robinson, what's maddening is that this has been obvious from the beginning, but there have been so many people pretending that this isn't what's happening. And again, that's the wildest part about this, is that this was all obvious from the day after October 7th, when you listen to what Israeli politicians said were their goals inside of Gaza, when you listen to the dehumanizing language of wipe them out, we're fighting human animals, when Benjamin Netanyahu is referencing the biblical story of Amalek. The genocidal intent was there from the beginning. It was there from the beginning. And it's not something complicated. It's not something that's too complex for people to understand and we have to listen to both sides. No, there's no both sides of a genocide. Right? When they're openly, proudly talking about resettling Gaza, pushing the entire population out, that just is what it is, right? On a factual matter, Israel is committing genocide. They've had the intent to commit genocide since day one. And again, it's not difficult to predict that was the case. Now, last thing here, as we finish off this very long video, here from Dropsite News on the positive end of things, if you can call it that, Belgium actually arrested Israeli soldiers for war crimes committed in Gaza. So they say the Belgian police arrested and interrogated 2 Israeli soldiers at the Tomorrowland Music Festival following a legal complaint by the Hind Rajab Foundation and the GLAN. The 2 were released, but a criminal investigation is now underway. They say for the first time in Europe, Israeli suspects linked to crimes in Gaza have been subjected to formal arrest and questioning. Said the groups, we believe something important has begun. And this should just be the start of this, right? Let's be honest. I mean, I'm an American, obviously. I think that any American who decided to go over and to fight in Gaza, any American who decided to go over and to participate in this genocide should either be blocked from returning to the United States or they should be welcomed back and immediately arrested, interrogated, and charged for war crimes. I mean, that's the only realistic way to handle this moving forward. There is no way to just move forward with the world once this has taken place, right? What the U.S. and Israel have done effectively, outside of these kinds of very rare situations of this kind of accountability, is we have obliterated any sort of notion that international law matters, that human rights matter. We've obliterated that. That no longer exists. Nobody will ever believe that for the rest of time. You cannot do what the U.S. and Israel have done to Gaza and then expect to have credibility on those things. And the other thing, and this was something that was pointed out by the Colombian president just a few days ago when they had this massive global meeting of dozens of countries who got together to try to figure out how to stop Israel from continuing with this genocide. And he made an important point, which was that this is just sort of a test run, right? This is about, if we can get away with this, then this is how we can treat the rest of the global South moving forward into the future, whether it's, a breakdown of civilization due to climate change, or whether it's, continued imperial expansion from the US or Western Europe. This is what we can expect for the future. If this is allowed to be normalized, if they can perpetrate these crimes without any accountability, then there are no rules, right? The only rules are, if you have the bigger, more powerful military, you can do whatever the fuck you want. Right? You can invade other countries. You can bomb other countries' capitals. You can, massacre civilians at an industrial scale, and nothing will ever come from it. So that's the world that we are, we're creating at this point. But again, hopefully this is some sort of a sign in the positive direction, and we can actually start to build some mechanisms of accountability for the perpetrators of this genocide. So I'll leave you guys off with that. Nelk Boys, Jesus Christ, man, you got to work on it. I don't know why you would do this if you self-admittedly were totally unprepared and unequipped to handle this kind of a situation. But, this is the kind of stuff that's happening in the background. So I'll leave you guys off with that.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying